John Hutchinson, thanks so much for coming on to Evolution Soup from your office right here in the UK. You are a Professor of Evolutionary Biomechanics at the Royal Veterinary College in London, focusing on how locomotion evolved in different groups of land vertebrates. Today we're going to be exploring the evolution of the horse, one of the best records of change through time within the fossil record. So how are you doing, John? You're an American expat, just like myself. So where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin in the Midwest, a couple hours north of Chicago. I did my undergraduate degree in zoology, where, I just kind of dabbled and learned about animals, continued my passion from my childhood of being interested in animals, and eventually decided that science might be right for me as a career. Gradually wandered in the direction of research.
Well, before we get into the amazing world of horse evolution, let's just hear a little bit more about your background. John, you've grown up in the States, as you said, but what about your academic education? Did you study in both the States and the UK?
So my undergraduate degree was just in zoology in the U.S., in Madison. I stayed in my hometown. And I took a variety of classes trying to figure out what I really enjoyed, and found that evolution really interested me. I took some classes in evolution, really liked that. And paleontology, I took a little bit of paleontology coursework, like that as well. And then the novel Jurassic Park came out. I read that. I liked that. Then the movie came out, and I was like, oh yeah, dinosaurs. Yeah, I used to really like them a lot. Maybe I can somehow combine my old childhood passion for dinosaurs, paleontology, and so forth with evolution. And I was starting to kind of like biomechanics, how things worked. I had always been interested in how animals worked, but by taking some classes about it, I really got interested in the scientific topic of animal like function or movement. So that's where I started to refine my interests in potentially studying animal movement, evolution, and maybe working dinosaurs into that somehow.
I can certainly relate to loving dinosaurs. That's how it all started with me as well. Well, you describe yourself as an evolutionary biomechanist. So what kind of research does this entail?
Yeah, so an evolutionary biomechanist is kind of a rare breed of biologist who studies, in my case, especially how the way that animals work, especially how locomotion works in a Newtonian mechanics kind of way, so the physics of movement applied to animal biology, but how that has evolved, so how major transitions in like locomotor function and mechanics have evolved over time.
Well, when we think of horses, we think of the domesticated hoofed mammals that we see pretty much everywhere and in all cultures. But they come from a diverse and fascinating group called the PERISSODACTYLS, a group that goes back over 55 million years. This group not only includes modern-day rhinos, but some gigantic rhino relatives of the past that are long extinct. Isn't that right?
Yeah. The perissodactyls have had a flowering of diversity in the past, large and small forms. But the Paraceratherium, the gigantic rhinos that were mostly around in the Oligocene epoch, so well over 23 million years ago, would be the Oligocene. So quite a while ago, back in the early time of mammals, there were gigantic rhinos around with fairly long necks. They didn't seem to have horns, and Paraceratherium was one of the largest of them, and certainly one of the, if not the largest land mammals ever. So easily 6 meters, 20 foot tall, possibly as heavy as 20 tons, 20,000 kilograms. Really massive animals. Only the largest mammoths would have rivaled them in size at best.
Right, and how would you contrast them to artiodactyls?
Yeah, so perissodactyls, Did pretty well in diversity back in like the Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene, back in the early days of mammals. They were doing okay. They had some interesting lineages, like they had the Titanotheres or Brontotheres, which were rhino-like but had a bony horn core that
Mm.
kind of split two ways.
Oh, yes.
Instead of modern rhinos have a hairy or keratinous sort of horn that you get one in front and then maybe one in the back if you have a horn at all that's of any note.
Mm.
So Titanotheres were different, and they seem to be more closely related to horses than to anything else. They seem to be horses' closest relatives of anything that's not remotely a horse, and they got really big, like elephant size, these Titanotheres. So those are really interesting. There were Chalicotheres, which are really weird, long
Oh,
front
yeah.
legs, big claws on their front legs, look like they were used for digging or grasping branches, sort of a horse-like head on a long neck, and then shorter hind legs with a sloping back. Really weird animals. I still don't understand them, but they were around like in the around the Oligocene, Eocene, along with many other perissodactyls. Perissodactyls are the
Yeah.
odd-toed ungulates, so they have variably 1, 3, 5 toes. Typically, more like 3 is the most common. But perissodactyls, yeah, so they were doing well back in the early times of mammals, but then they really hit harder times toward more recent times, like the Ice Ages and so
Mm.
forth. There were many extinctions of perissodactyl lineages, unlike the artiodactyls, who have done quite well throughout the history of mammals and still are doing relatively well. So the artiodactyls are the even-toed, hoofed mammals that we're quite familiar with, from camels and llamas to pigs and even whales and
Oh,
sheep,
yeah.
and then the bovid lineage, which is very diverse, so antelope and cows and so on and so forth. So artiodactyls are very diverse in both species and form and function and so forth, unlike perissodactyls, which these days are just clinging to existence. The only other
Mm.
living lineage of perissodactyls is the tapirs, which many people
Ah.
don't even probably know about, but they're kind of smaller, more jungle or swamp dwelling animals today with a proboscis, so they have a short trunk,
Hmm.
somewhat amphibious and reclusive, and they've been around since the Eocene and all over the world. Originally, they were doing pretty well, but more recently are pretty restricted to where you can find them in more tropical regions. So tapirs are around. Rhinos are a lineage that is really only a shadow of its former diversity. So the 5
Yeah.
main species of living rhinos are only pretty homogeneous compared to what used to exist, like the giant rhinos, but there were also aquatic rhinos that were more hippo-like, lots of
Mm.
really cool, like small running rhinos that were more like early horses in their form. So perissodactyls had some really cool forms that are all gone and we wouldn't know about except for the fossil record. And yeah, extinction has been really, really tough on them, whereas artiodactyls have clung on to existence and diversified pretty well.
Well, there are over a dozen genera of equids going back over 50 million years of time, from the fox-sized Eohippus with its spread-out toes to the modern-day horse with its single hooves. John, can you give us an overview of these iterations of equines and why we now think they got larger and why the toes became hooves?
Yeah, so equids, the horses, broadly speaking, are part of an even larger group called the equoids, which includes a few more species that all together originated in North America around 55 million years ago, so in the Eocene, and then in the Eocene, shortly thereafter, we have Eohippus, the dawn horse, which was a browser, so a
Hmm.
small animal that was like the size of a fox, small dog kind of size. Had four main toes on the front legs, although it had five toes in total, and three main toes on the hind feet, although again, five total, just really small, two extra
Yeah.
toes. That's what Eohippus was like. More of a forest type animal, so a browser feeding off of leaves, bushes, that kind of stuff, not a grazer feeding on grasslands, which is something that happens
Mm.
only later in horse evolution. So that's how equids get started, is with things like Eohippus. And some of them, equids, equoids, made it to the old world shortly thereafter, 52 million years ago or so, but not many. They didn't really get established in the old world in the Eocene early on. It was only later, like in the Miocene, which is really when
Mm.
equids peak in diversity. Equids horses really were doing amazingly well around 23 million years ago to 5 million years ago in the Miocene epoch. And that's when you get all kinds of equids, from small forms, medium-sized forms, large forms, even like modern-sized forms, quite large. You get anywhere from three main toes to down to very close to one main toe. Some correlation there with larger sized horses tending to have fewer numbers of toes, but not always. Some of them, you got some pretty big horses with three main toes still. And around 23 million years ago, so early in the Miocene, you do get some forms spreading into Eurasia, so pretty far west uh,
Mm.
into the Eurasian continent. Forms like Ankytherium is well known, and other horse-like forms, and eventually even 12 million years ago, so past the Miocene, or sorry, late mid Miocene, I should say,
Mm.
you get some species making their way into South America. Um, but the problem is that these equids or equoids don't last very long. So there are a series of mass extinctions that wipe them out. And that diversity that is there in the Miocene, you don't really see so much by the time you get to the Pliocene, or especially later. Nonetheless, you do see very characteristic horsey type forms. So you see the long legs, that's
Hmm.
characteristic of horses, lengthening the stride, adding to speed, making locomotion more efficient. You see definite hints of that focus on one toe again and again and again, repeatedly in equid evolution. And that's thought to both lighten the foot to make it easier to swing through the air when the foot is off the ground, less
Ah.
inertia, and also make the foot stronger. So consolidating the toe
Ah,
into
yes.
one main toe really just strengthens, enables the horse to strengthen that one toe. The loading on it when the foot is on the ground is pretty simple anyway. It's just undergoing a lot of compression and bending because the leg swings in one main plane. But just really focusing the adaptation of the horse's limb on that single toe and being really strong in that one toe. So it's kind of a best of both worlds, having a light foot but a strong foot is what horses are doing with that. And also concentrating a lot of their muscle mass further up the limb, so closer to the shoulder and the hip,
Mm.
and much less muscle once you get below the elbow or the knee. Once you get below the elbow or the knee, it's pretty much all, especially in modern horses or in forms that probably had a more modern anatomy, pretty much all tendon and ligament. So very skinny lower limbs. Like you look at a horse today, everything below the anatomical
Yes.
elbow and knee is really thin and tendinous and ligamentous, and that makes it very cheap to support those joints, like the wrist, the fingers, the toes. are all supported by passive tissue directly, ligament and tendon. And that gives the step a lot of spring too, which makes
Yes.
locomotion rather efficient and a smooth ride for the animal. Well, the link of having a single toe to being larger, which is a trend, it's not always the case, but certainly Equus is a great example of that, is that being big requires resisting gravity quite a bit. It's harder. The constraints of gravity are more demanding. And having a single, very vertically oriented toe, like a pillar, is really good for resisting gravity. So it gives you really good leverage in resisting gravity, so your whole limb can be aligned in a more pillar-like fashion along the line of gravity. And so you get a lot of passive support from the bones of the foot and the whole limb, as well as the tendons. You can kind of support yourself more passively against gravity rather than relying on active muscular energy, which is expensive to support yourself against gravity. So that's what Equus does. So there are a lot of benefits to this anatomy, and that seems to be one reason why horses are both successful in evolutionary terms in some ways, but also attractive to humans, or became attractive to humans eventually. We realized that these locomotor adaptations are good, and horses have done well both in modern terms. The genus Equus, which arose about 4 million years ago in North America, so that includes the ancestor of horses, zebras, and the asses, donkeys. They all have this characteristic anatomy. They've lived in many different habitats, from very cold deserts to very hot deserts to forests to grasslands. Equus as a whole is a grazer, and that's something I touched on. That is a theme that evolves especially in the Miocene, but also began in the Oligocene earlier than 23 million years ago. And we didn't have grasslands really in the world until then. We didn't have the savannas and so forth that we're so familiar with today until pretty recently in geologic times, like 30 million years ago, or maybe a little bit more. But certainly by the Miocene, we get those grasslands. And then we get a shift in equoids and equids to becoming more grazer-like, so bigger, tougher teeth that are higher crowned, able to grind down as they eat this really tough vegetation of grasses that's full of silica, that's really nasty on teeth and will wear down teeth unless animals have the proper adaptations in their teeth. And that's something that equoids, or equids, especially Equus, had and still have, is those really high crowned, tough teeth that can handle eating nasty grasses throughout the life of the animal, and having those teeth gradually worn down as they do so. Horses, because they're large today and started off small, forms like Eohippus, have long been pointed to as an example of what's called Cope's rule, or Cope's law, named after Edward Drinker Cope back in the 1800s, also called the law of the unspecialized. And that's the idea that animals start off as pretty simple, generalized animals that are small, and then gradually evolve toward larger, more specialized forms that ultimately get so big and so specialized that they go extinct. That idea of very, very directional evolution toward some almost intentional goal that ultimately results in evolution is very discredited. But still, there is the idea that perhaps increasing in size through evolution is a trend. And horses have long been held up as an example of that, but more recently, scientists have looked at the fossil record of horses and realized that they don't really fit Cope's rule very well. Yes, they started off small and got bigger, but really the story of horse evolution is one of diversifying. That horses started off small and then diversified into a wide range of sizes: small, medium, large. There are reversals. Horses get smaller as well as get bigger. There were really big forms quite a while ago, and it just so happens that the one survivor of all of the equid radiation happened to be Equus, which was moderately large. And that just is a happenstance, and Equus then almost went extinct too.
Yeah, we have the Shire horse, which is I think that's a fairly big one, and then there's the really tiny horse you can find in various parts of the world.
Sure, horses are very plastic. They've responded well to human breeding, so size as well as other aspects have been very malleable for us.
Yes, and of course, human beings, we love our horses so much, we're not going to allow them to go extinct, are we?
No, I don't think we will, unlike plenty of other species.
John, we see horses all over the world today. Their geographical history on Earth is quite complex and a bit confusing. I think I'm right in saying that they began in North America, then disappeared from North America, only to end up back in North America again when humans reintroduced them. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we get modern horses, Equus, around 4 million years ago. They spread to the old world across the land bridge from like
Mm.
Canada, Alaska, around 2 million years ago, or maybe a bit more than that, and then diversify across the old world more recently. But then we get the ice ages coming, various series of ice ages, back and forth glaciers growing from the north down to the south and receding. And with those, we have the diminishment of the grasslands that horses rely upon so much. And ultimately, that hits horses in North America and South America so hard that around 10 to 12,000 years ago, horses in the Americas go completely extinct. So there are no species of Equus whatsoever in North America. They're all restricted to the old world where they didn't originate. And geologically speaking, they originated in the New World pretty recently, but then ironically they get wiped out there by a combination of, mainly it seems, climate change, and then potentially some human hunting, wiping out the last stragglers. That's controversial. And then humans brought horses back to America only very, very recently
Yeah.
to the Americas. So just 500 years ago or so, Christopher Columbus brought 16 horses with him, and then Cortez and other explorers brought more and more horses that gradually got established in the Americas again, and you get the wild Mustangs still out there, but you would be very mistaken to think that they were always there or there for a long time. They've been there for just a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms.
So, humans reintroduced domesticated horses to the Americas, and now we see this animal all across the globe. But what do we know about this domestication? How long were humans riding horses, and did they use them for any other purpose, such as food?
Yeah, so there is some archaeological record of what humans were doing with horses after just hunting and eating them, which they probably were doing for many thousands of years. But there is a culture in Central Asia, modern Kazakhstan, called the bow tie culture, a very enigmatic culture of peoples from about 5,500 years ago. And that culture has abundant archaeological evidence of interaction with horses, so much that it's clear they were not just hunting horses, and they were sedentary. They seem to have been doing more modern kinds of activity in a settlement. And the evidence for horses from the bow tie culture is that they were using milk, so there's a residue of milk on their pottery from horses, and they were also eating the meat from horses. They were herding them, so they were keeping horses together like a livestock, and also there are tantalizing evidences of them harnessing the horses. So were they riding them or not? Maybe. That is not 100% clear, but also the Botai culture was pretty sophisticated. They also had domesticated dogs. So this was a culture that was doing a lot with animals. And that was quite some time ago in terms of human history, so 5,500 years ago. But then about around 4,000 years ago, the modern ancestor of all living horses
Mm-hmm.
was being used in the Volga area of Western Eurasia, so a bit west of where the Botai culture was active. And they were definitely riding horses and using horses to pull chariots. And this was associated with a more warlike culture that was not just sitting still and herding livestock, but was going out and doing conquest and using horses as a means of conquest. So that ancestor of horses then spread across Eurasia and is still being used today.
And when you say bow tie, you don't mean like what you wear in a tuxedo, do you? Because that's the first thing that comes to mind.
No, bow tie is B-O-T-A-I, the bow tie
Okay.
culture, yeah.
John, you are also known for your work relating to dinosaurs. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I happened to do my PhD at University of California, Berkeley on dinosaur locomotion. That's just what I settled on as my thesis topic, and that has kept me busy throughout my career. I've done a lot of research on dinosaurs as well as other species, but I keep coming back to dinosaurs because they really interest me. So much diversity in terms of size and posture. So there are two-legged and four-legged dinosaurs. There's lots of different anatomies and so forth. They had a very, very long evolutionary history, and they're still around as birds. They're descendants, which technically are dinosaurs. But what really interested me more recently, after working on T-Rex, which is one of the later dinosaurs, is the earlier dinosaurs and how dinosaurs got started. Dinosaurs began just over 250 million years ago after a huge mass extinction at the end of the Permian period. They began as relatively small, long-legged animals, sort of like early horses in a way, seem to have been fast runners and so forth. But they lived alongside all these other animals that were generally very crocodile-like in form and actually more closely related to crocodiles. And these animals lived on land and in water during the Triassic period, so from around 250 to 200-ish million years ago. And then there was a mass extinction that wiped almost all of those animals except the forebears of crocodiles out. And dinosaurs, curiously, after diversifying through the Triassic, but never really reaching huge diversity, then just sail through that mass extinction at the end of the Triassic and go on and diversify tremendously in the Jurassic and then the Cretaceous. And so the question has long perplexed scientists: why did dinosaurs do so well through the Triassic and into the Jurassic onwards, but these other animals that looked pretty well adapted and so forth, you wouldn't point to them in the Triassic and say, oh, they're losers, dinosaurs are winners. Why did those other animals go extinct, but dinosaurs didn't? And there are a variety of hypotheses. One of them is that dinosaurs, because they were more long-legged, potentially more fast and efficient and so forth at moving, maybe that gave them an edge in the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinctions and helped them survive onwards and proliferate afterwards. So that's one idea I wanted to test using biomechanics, because no one had ever really used the physics of locomotion to address this. It was only just looking at dinosaurs and thinking, well, they look fast. So probably they were. But the way animals look can be deceiving. So using physics, I wanted to test that. I got some money from the EU to do so, and have been studying that for the past 5 years, using computer modeling as well as experiments with living animals, living crocodiles and birds, to really understand how they walk and run, and then applying computer models of those animals to them to understand how they walk and run, and applying the same computer models and simulations to extinct animals like dinosaurs to try to estimate how they might have worked. And we don't yet have an answer whether dinosaurs were superior in the way they moved to other Triassic animals that they lived alongside, but we hope to find out soon. And it's really really fun work, as well as it's shedding some light for us on how dinosaurs got up on two legs in the first place, and other changes that they experienced back in the Triassic period. So watch this space. Hopefully we'll have more to say about that soon.
Well, it's been really fascinating talking to you, John, and hopefully we can have you back on the show one day to talk about your research into dinosaurs and dinosaur locomotion. I will leave links to your research papers and social media in the description below. And all that's left to say is thank you very much indeed, John, for coming on to Evolution Soup.
Thank you, Mark. It's been fun horsing around with you on Evolution Soup, and I hope to do some more again with you soon enough.